dog wouldn't move. He'd planted himself in the snow beside a man sleeping in a cardboard shelter under the overpass. And no matter how Cole called him, the German shepherd only looked back at him and then down at the sleeping figure, refusing to leave. Cole came closer through the falling snow, ready to apologize to whoever the dog had cornered. And then he stopped, because he knew that jacket. It was wrapped around the homeless man's shoulders, filthy and threadbare now, but he knew it. The desert-patterned field jacket with the particular tear at the left cuff, the faded name tape he could almost read from here. It was his jacket, the one he'd given away 11 years ago to a man he'd thought was dead. The Marine stood frozen in the snow and said nothing yet. He had learned a long time ago that the first thing you do is watch, but his heart was already hammering because the dog hadn't found a stranger at all. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay until the very end. What you're about to hear will restore your faith in the people who are still out there, quietly paying attention. Let's see how far this journey takes us together. His name was Cole Hayes, and he was 42 years old, built broad through the shoulders and chest the way men stay built when discipline has long outlived the reason for it. His dark hair had gone gray at the temples, cropped close out of habit. A thin scar traced the line of his jaw and disappeared under his collar. The kind of mark a man stops explaining after the 10th time. But it was the eyes people noticed and then looked away from. Cold gray, restless. The eyes of someone who never truly stopped scanning rooms, exits, and the hands of strangers without asking permission. And then, having measured, let you be. He moved through the world with the permanent stillness of a man who had nothing left to prove. Not aggression, its opposite. He was not unfriendly by nature. Life had simply sanded down the parts of him that used to speak first. He watched more than he talked, and when he finally did move, he moved all at once, the way still water becomes a flood. Helmand had taken friends. The years after had taken the illusion that peace meant quiet. Now Cole lived in the narrow space between discipline and distance, in a cold Rust Belt city in northern Ohio where nobody knew his name, which was exactly how he'd wanted it. Cole had served 13 years in the Marine Corps, the last 8 as a military working dog handler with 2 tours in Helmand Province and 1 in Anbar. He'd left after a roadside blast outside Marja killed men beside him and put enough metal in his hip that the surgeon spent 5 hours deciding what to leave. The medical discharge had come with a folded flag for another man's mother and a limp that woke him on cold mornings. He had carried more men than he could comfortably count, and he had come home to a country that thanked him in airports and forgot him on every road. In between, what he carried was simple and heavy, and one piece of it had a name. On Cole's second tour, a young Marine in his unit named Eli had been badly hurt in the same kind of blast that would later take Cole's hip, medivist out in a bad way, and somewhere in the fog of casualty reporting, Cole had been told the kid hadn't made it. Before that, on a freezing night at a forward position, Cole had given Eli his own field jacket, a small thing, a warm thing, the kind of thing men do for each other in cold places. He'd carried the kid's death for 11 years. One more name on the list. So Cole had taken work with a veterans outreach program, doing Winter Street outreach to homeless vets, and fixed what he could of what was broken, because at least a man could finish that. He'd been out in the snow that night doing a welfare check on the overpass camps, expecting the usual hard, sad work, the way he expected nothing more from most nights. The German shepherd at Cole's side was named Ranger. He was 6 years old, 90 pounds of black and rich amber, his coat darkened along the spine and across both ears, his body built like something assembled for a single purpose. His left ear carried a clean notch where shrapnel had passed through it on a road. Outside Sangin, an inch from ending him. He moved with the clean, controlled confidence of a trained canine who had long ago learned the difference between noise and threat, and he wasted nothing, no motion, no sound, no attention that wasn't earned. Ranger had been Cole's working dog overseas, retired and adopted after the discharge. 8 months of fighting the bureaucracy, filing the same forms over and over until someone signed off just to be rid of him. Ranger had never left his side since. He was routine, warning system, witness, and in the lonelier corners of the last few years, the closest thing Cole had let himself call family. And tonight Ranger had pulled hard toward a particular cardboard shelter under the overpass and would not be moved. Not the alert he gave a threat, but the urgent, certain pull he made when he had found something that mattered, something he needed Cole to see. The city was called Steel Falls, a worn industrial town on the northern Ohio plain where the mills had closed a generation back, and the cold came howling off the lake all winter long. That night a hard snow was falling, the kind that muffles a city and kills the unsheltered quietly, piling up under the overpasses where the forgotten built their cardboard rooms against the concrete. The street lights threw cones of falling white, and the highway hummed overhead. And down beneath it, men slept in the cold that outreach workers like Cole spent their winters trying to keep from becoming the cold that doesn't end. It was a brutal, forgotten place, and Cole had learned that forgotten places under bridges are where this country quietly loses the men it once sent to war, where a decorated Marine can end up sleeping in a stranger's discarded box, unrecognized, uncounted, an arm's length from a society that drives past overhead at 60 miles an hour. There was no single cruel man at the center of this story. The enemy was the long, grinding machinery of how a wounded veteran falls through every crack a nation leaves open. But as Cole pulled the thread, a name did surface, and it belonged to a man named Wade Vance, who ran a chain of veteran transitional housing facilities that collected substantial government and grant money to house and rehabilitate homeless veterans. Wade had learned that consequences were for other people, and that homeless men generate few questions. What Cole would come to learn was that Vance's facilities collected the per-veteran funding and then pushed the hardest cases, the ones with the worst injuries, the deepest trauma, the most expensive needs, quietly back out onto the street to keep his costs down and his success numbers high, billing for beds that turned over men they'd discarded. And that Eli, the kid Cole had buried in his heart 11 years ago, had been one of the veterans cycled through and abandoned by exactly that machine. What people in Steel Falls knew about Wade Vance was that his organization had ribbon cuttings and grateful press releases and a reputation for getting veterans off the streets. What few had connected was the revolving door, the men who entered his programs and ended up back under the overpasses within months, the funding claimed for rehabilitation that never happened, the success statistics built by discharging the difficult cases before they could fail on paper. What stood in the way of anyone seeing it was that the victims were homeless veterans, men the world had already decided not to look at, men whose word counted for nothing against a celebrated charity. You do not get believed when you sleep in a box. That was the design of it. The homeless man in Cole's old jacket was named Eli Briggs, 33 years old, and even ruined by the streets, he wore the wreckage of his service with a battered dignity. He had been the young Marine in Cole's unit, not dead after all, but medivest out, patched back together over years of surgeries, discharged with a body full of damage and a mind full of the war, and then set loose into a system that processed him and failed him and finally spat him out. He'd cycled through Wade Vance's program, been pushed back to the street when his case got too hard, and had been living under the Steel Falls overpasses through 2 winters, wrapped in the desert field jacket a sergeant named Hayes had given him on a cold night a world away. The one thing from before that he had never let go of because it was the last proof that he had once belonged to something that kept its men warm. He did not beg or complain. He survived, quietly, and kept the jacket, and waited for nothing because he had learned that nothing was what came. There was a terrible dignity in him even now. He had kept that jacket through everything a man can lose, kept it clean as he could, because it meant he had once been someone's brother. The contrast was the whole injustice in a single image. A Marine who had been blown up for his country and rebuilt and then quietly thrown away, sleeping in a cardboard box in the killing snow, wrapped in the jacket of the sergeant who'd thought him dead, while a celebrated man grew, comfortable on the money meant to have saved him. Cole saw the jacket first, the tear at the left cuff, the faded name tape, and then, as the sleeping man stirred and the streetlight caught his face under the grime and the beard and 11 hard years, Cole saw something that stopped his heart entirely. He knew that face, older, broken, half buried in a box in the snow, but he knew it. Ranger had not found a stranger. Ranger had found Eli. Cole went very quiet, the way he used to go quiet right before everything happened at once. Except this quiet had a sob caught in the middle of it. He dropped to his knees in the snow beside the cardboard shelter, and he said, in a voice that shook, a name he had not said aloud to a living man in 11 years. Eli Briggs, kid, God, kid, they told me you were dead. The man's eyes opened, wary, and found Cole's face, and worked at it, peeling back the years, and then filled, all at once, with disbelief and then with something that hurt to watch. Sergeant Hayes? Eli's cracked voice was barely a sound over the snow. Is that? They told me everybody from the unit was, "I kept your jacket, Sergeant. I kept it. It's the only thing I—" And he couldn't finish, and Ranger pushed his big head against the ruined young Marine and held it there. And Eli grabbed 2 fistfuls of the dog's fur and broke, finally, the way a man breaks when he is found. Wade Vance did not enter Cole's mind that night. That came after, when Cole had Eli warm and fed and safe, and started pulling threads, because men like Cole cannot leave a wrong half understood. Over the days that followed, Cole learned the shape of it. He got Eli into a real bed, a real doctor, real food, and listened. And he learned the rest with a fury he kept very still and very cold. That Eli had not simply fallen, but had been failed at the exact point that was supposed to catch him. That Wade Vance's program had taken him in, claimed the funding for his rehabilitation, and then pushed him back out when his trauma and his injuries made him an expensive, inconvenient case. He learned Eli was not the only one. He learned there was a pattern, a revolving door of the hardest cases discharged to the street while the money for their care stayed behind, a charity built on the men it pretended to save. The ally arrived in the form of a woman named Carol Reyes, a former caseworker at Vance's facility who'd quit when she could no longer stomach discharging broken men to the cold, and who heard a Marine doing street outreach had found one of her old cases alive under an overpass. "You found Eli Briggs," she said, her voice catching. It wasn't a question. She remembered him, remembered being ordered to close his case and clear his bed. She'd kept records before she left. The hard case discharges, the funding claimed against beds that turned men back out, the cooked success numbers. She'd sat on it, because who listens to a caseworker accusing a celebrated veterans charity? She gave Cole a name, a federal investigator who handled grant and charity fraud, and a veterans legal organization that would care very much that men like Eli had been monetized and discarded. Ranger would not leave Eli's side now, riding along on every visit, lying across the young Marine's feet the way he had once lain across Cole's in the worst nights. 2 soldiers and a dog who had all been broken by the same war and had, impossibly, found their way back to one another. Cole let him stay. For the first time in 11 years, Eli Briggs was not alone and was not waiting for nothing. Cole made the call to the federal investigator and laid it out flat. The funding claimed for rehabilitation that never happened. The hardest cases pushed back to the street to protect the numbers, the revolving door, the records Carol Reyes had kept, and a decorated Marine left to freeze under an overpass in a system paid to save him. He didn't raise his voice. He'd been trained to brief command, and he briefed it. "You've done this before," the investigator said. "Seen enough of it," Cole said. Wade Vance moved first, the way the powerful always do when they feel the ground shift. Word reached him that someone was asking questions and that one of his discarded cases had surfaced with an advocate, and Wade did what protected the charity. He moved to recharacterize Eli's file as a voluntary departure and a non-compliant client, painting the man's abandonment as his own choice, and reached out to discredit Carol Reyes as a disgruntled former employee before any investigator gave her weight. He scheduled his paperwork and his denials for a window he assumed no one could close, certain that the word of a homeless man and a quit caseworker could never touch him. He had not counted on a Marine who had already put the proof in federal hands. Eli told gently that the charity was now saying he'd left their program by choice, and that proving otherwise would be a long fight against people with this. Lawyers felt the old certainty close over him, the certainty the streets had taught him, that no one would believe a man who slept in a box, that the system always protected itself, that he would be made to be the author of his own abandonment. For a moment, even Eli Briggs, who had survived a blast that should have killed him, and 2 winters that should have finished the job, prepared to let it go, because fighting felt like one more thing the world would take from him. But this time he had his sergeant back, and a dog that wouldn't leave, and he was not alone. And Cole was already moving, because 13 years had taught a man named Cole Hayes to be in the room before the thing he was guarding against arrived. The confrontation came in the boardroom of Wade Vance's flagship facility, where the celebrated director had assembled with his administrators to manage the personal matter and close Eli's file clean, and where Cole walked in instead with the federal investigator, the veteran's legal advocate, Carol Reyes, and Eli Briggs himself, cleaned up and steady on his feet now, with Ranger at his side. The dog walked into that boardroom and crossed to sit between Eli and Wade Vance, and fixed the director with a long, level, unblinking stare, 90 pounds of judgment that no press release could charm. The room had gone quiet, Not silent, quiet, the kind of unnatural drop in sound that trained people notice immediately. Cole stepped forward, slow, and nobody moved. "Before you file one more piece of paper calling this man non-compliant," Cole said, "you should know who's already read your files." Vance's practiced warmth was already hardening into something defensive. "This is a confidential personnel and client matter. You are not affiliated with this organization, and I won't have my staff's important work disrupted by whatever this is. We have housed and saved hundreds of veterans. Who exactly are you to walk into my building?" "Gunnery Sergeant Cole Hayes," Cole said, and his voice never rose. "United States Marine Corps, 13 years, 3 deployments. 8 of those years I had exactly one job, standing between people who couldn't protect themselves and whoever wanted to hurt them. So no, I don't much care how many ribbon cuttings you've had." He put a hand on the young man's shoulder. "But I'll tell you who this is. Eli Briggs, United States Marine. Wounded in action in Helmand 11 years ago. I was there. I gave him my own jacket on a cold night downrange. And then I was told he died of his wounds, and I carried that for 11 years. He didn't die. Your program took him in, took the money to rehabilitate him, and pushed him back onto the street the second his injuries made him expensive. I found him last week sleeping in a cardboard box in the snow, still wearing my jacket. The only thing he had left. That man left our program voluntarily. This is the Federal Investigator's Office," the legal advocate said, stepping forward with a folder, "looking into grant and charity fraud across your facilities. We have the funding you claimed against beds that cycled the hardest cases back to the street. We have the discharge records, the voluntary departures that were nothing of the kind. We have Ms. Reyes's files, kept before she resigned rather than keep closing cases like his. And we have Mr. Briggs alive to testify to exactly how your rehabilitation ended." She set it down. "You didn't save these men. You billed for them and threw them away. And it's all on the record now." Vance's smooth voice climbed and cracked. "You can't prove intent. Those are clinical decisions. My organization has saved hundreds. I'll have my lawyers. This isn't over," Wade tried. But the words came out smaller than all his ribbon cuttings had ever let them come. It was over. He just hadn't caught up to it yet. The investigation moved past that boardroom and did not stop. Eli's file was pulled and the truth of his discharge laid bare against the cooked record. Wade Vance's celebrated charity unraveled under a federal probe into grant fraud spanning years as investigators traced the revolving door and the money claimed for men pushed back into the cold. The case building case file by case file, discarded veteran by discarded veteran, in front of the administrators who'd carried it out and who, when the moment came, found that some of them had been waiting for someone the charity couldn't silence. A board member near the door covered her mouth with her hand. Nobody spoke for a long time after that. Cole didn't watch them deal with Vance. He'd turned to Eli Briggs, who stood with one hand buried in Ranger's fur, wearing a clean coat now but with the old desert jacket folded carefully over his arm, because he would not be parted from it. 11 years I thought I'd lost you, kid," Cole said, and his voice was not steady. 11 years that jacket was keeping you alive under a bridge 3 states from where I gave it to you. If Ranger hadn't pulled me to that box, he found me," Eli said softly, his hand tightening in the dog's fur. "Same as you found me downrange, Sergeant. Somebody from the unit came back for me. I stopped believing anybody would." He looked down at the dog. "He wouldn't leave. Just like you wouldn't back then." "That's the job," Cole said quietly. "You never leave a man behind. Took us 11 years and a dog in the snow. But we don't leave anybody behind. Not ever." 8 months later, the late summer sun came down warm and golden over a small house on a quiet street. In Steel Falls, a garden coming up in the side yard, a porch with 2 chairs on it. Cole sat on the step with a cup of coffee, his bad hip stretched out long, and Carol Reyes, who'd found honest work again and a measure of peace in finally being believed, sat beside him, with iced tea, and neither of them said much because they didn't need to. Out in the yard, a younger man, filled out now, clear-eyed, steady, threw a ball for a black and amber German shepherd that bolted across the grass after it with unadulterated joy, and the young man laughed, a sound that 11 hard years had nearly taken from him for good. The reckoning had reached far past one cardboard box. Wade Vance's revolving door charity collapsed under federal charges of grant fraud, and the funding meant for veterans was clawed back and redirected to programs that actually housed them. The men his system had discarded began, some of them, to be found and brought in from the cold. New oversight was written so the hardest cases could no longer be the first ones thrown away. Eli Briggs got the care he should have had a decade before, The surgeries, the counseling, the housing, the long, slow work of coming back, and was, 8 months on, a man with a future again. He had taken to helping Cole with the Winter Street outreach, walking under the overpasses himself now, looking for the men still out there, because he knew exactly what it was to be the one in the box that everyone drove past. The old desert jacket, cleaned and mended at last, hung framed on the wall of Eli's new place, not hidden away but kept where he could see it. The proof that he had once belonged to something that kept its men warm, and the proof now that it had come back for him. Cole still ran his outreach, and his dog still rode beside him. The metal in his hip still woke him on cold mornings. But on the first Saturday of every month, and most days between, he came by the small house, and a young Marine he'd buried in his heart and found in the snow raised a hand from the porch, and a dog came galloping across the yard to meet him, and a man who had spent years not knowing what he was for found he had finally, quietly, worked it out. Ranger ran to him and then ran back to Eli, claiming them both, his tail never stopping. Peace had arrived, the story was over. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder from the sky. Sometimes they come on 4 legs through a snowstorm and refuse to leave a cardboard box, because a dog has found a brother that the whole world drove past. The world isn't saved by superheroes. It's saved by ordinary people who go out into the cold to look for the ones everyone else has stopped seeing, and by animals who carry a loyalty so faithful that human language has never once been adequate to hold it. God does not always keep our wounded from falling through the cracks, and He does not always spare the men who served us the cruelty of being thrown away by the very systems built to catch them. Eli Briggs survived a war only to be discarded by his own country and left to freeze under a bridge, wrapped in the one thing that told him he'd once mattered. That is a sin this nation commits more often than it can bear to admit. But sometimes, in His mercy, a brother given up for dead is found alive in the snow, because a dog would not walk away from a sleeping stranger who was not a stranger at all. Eli kept that jacket through 11 years of hell because it was proof that someone had once refused to let him be cold. The miracle wasn't only that a corrupt man was finally brought to account, though he was. It was that the oldest promise soldiers make to one another, that no one gets left behind, turned out to be true even 11 years late, even 3 states away, even under a bridge in a killing snow, carried home at last by a sergeant who never stopped grieving and a dog who simply would not leave. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that no one is ever truly beyond finding, and that the promise to leave no one behind is worth keeping even years too late. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And tell us, have you ever found someone you thought was lost for good, or been found yourself when you'd stopped believing anyone would come? Your story may be the one that reminds another person to look under the bridge. And if you believe in stories of service, loyalty, and the quiet courage of ordinary people, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, bring peace to your home, and watch over every forgotten veteran sleeping in the cold tonight. And send them, by whatever grace it takes, a brother and a dog who refuse to drive past.